Welcome to Haul Around the World, presented by Crushing Comics. I'm your host, Crisis with a K, and I'm here in my home in Wellington, New Zealand, with a portion of my comic book collection surrounding me on all sides. And a large part of this collection came to Wellington with me in 2017 when I moved here from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, so I hauled it around the world. But now, when I want to add new things to the collection, I also have to have them hauled around the world because they tend to originate from the United States, sometimes from Canada or the UK, sometimes a little closer to home in Australia, but very rarely from within New Zealand. So that's why this, my unboxing series, Haul Around the World, is called what it is called. And I'm coming back after having not done this for a while, over a year actually, although I had been hauling all along. And the reason I'm starting it again today is because it's a peculiar anniversary for me and I'm sure for many other people. It happens that today, the day that I'm recording this, was the 1 year anniversary of when New Zealand went into our level 4 lockdown related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Here in New Zealand, level 4 was the most restrictive lockdown. There was no school, no restaurants or dining open. It was really the bare essentials of things like gas stations and supermarkets. And we were not supposed to go outside, stay within our own bubbles, not drive our cars more than 5 kilometers away from our house if we could help it. It was very, very restrictive. Now, I could go into the whole pandemic experience in New Zealand, which has been markedly different than what it has been in the rest of the world. And maybe you're interested in that. And if you are, let me know. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here because I was just thinking about the feeling of that day of being like, well, this is it. We're all going into our houses here. It's happening into a lot of places around the world. How's that going to change life, right? I know some people, you worry about groceries. You worry about how you're going to keep your kids entertained. There was a lot of last minute stuff that in those last few days we were like, can we get it into the house? And we're very lucky to have the privilege that those things were not like essential things, right? We have enough food. We had heaters for the winter. That stuff was handled. And so it gave me the luxury of saying, well, if this is going to be the end of being able to haul around the world to get this stuff to my house, there is one book or one set of books that I'm eternally going to have fear of missing out on if this is just the end of getting books into the country. Because we didn't know what would change at that time, if there would even still be comic distribution, if there would be imports and exports. And I asked myself, is there something selfishly I want to have in the house with me? And, fear of missing out, it can represent different things for different people. I think a bad habit to get into is just buying everything because you have a fear of missing out and that you're not going to be able to get it later when you're interested in it. And gosh knows I have done that. I mean, there was a point that I was buying pretty much every single Marvel collection. I had a pull list that was effectively, if it says Marvel and if it's collected, just send it to my house. And I did that for years before I really realized that I was collecting with no rhyme and reason, and there were some things that I was not going to go back to read. So even though it seems like I have a ridiculous amount of books and do a ridiculous amount of consumption, it is with a little bit more intent with that these days. And especially with collected editions, because epic collections exist and because I collect them, I don't tend to be like, oh gosh, should I buy it for every omnibus? I just don't have that anymore. I feel like it's on Marvel Unlimited. It's here in my house. DC Unlimited exists now too. I'm just not as nervous that if I don't get a book at a certain time, I'm not going to get it. So this fear of missing out wasn't really like, is anything short printed and I'm going to miss out on buying it? It wasn't that kind of fear of missing out. It wasn't I wonder if I might like such and such a thing, because the whole digital everything was still going to exist. It was purely, is there something that I know I love, that I really highly regard, and that if I had to look around on these shelves and say, this is my complete library, would I say, but it's critically missing XYZ book? And the book that turned out to be, it was a series of books, is DC's Golden Age Wonder Woman omnibuses. At the time, there were 4 volumes. The 4th volume had just come out. It was a brand new book, I think the week that all this conversation was happening. Now, I love Wonder Woman. It doesn't come up as much as my love for Marvel and X-Men because I haven't read as much Wonder Woman as I've read X-Men, although I've read a lot. And because I often feel like maybe I'm not the right person to have like a really in-depth, deep dive for Wonder Woman, because I think there's some other aspects, not only of her femininity, but just of her history that requires voices other than mine to do a really deep dive. But I love her. Ever since I was a kid, I remember I was 5 years old. We lived in Southwest Philadelphia and we would have to get books from the library. We had no budget for books. I was pretty poor at that age in my life. And there was this Wonder Woman collection, I think it was from the late 70s or early 80s, that collected some of her Golden Age greatest hits. And it had her first issue in it. And we got it from the library. And then eventually we actually had our own copy of it. Like, I guess my mom tracked one down somewhere rather than getting it out of the library over and over again. And And I remember it had this page in it, this very famous page that many people will recognize of Wonder Woman bolting onto frame in the first issue of her first appearance. And that's always stuck with me. And I have that in Wonder Woman Archives. So Wonder Woman Archives exist. Archives was DC's kind of equivalent of hardcover Marvel Masterworks. They started in the early 1990s and they continued to publish them. And there are 7 Wonder Woman archives that collect the golden age of Wonder Woman. And Wonder Woman's golden age was not just in her own title, Wonder Woman, which began in 1942. She also very regularly appeared as the A story in Sensation Comics. So if we're talking about Golden Age Wonder Woman, it includes both. So the first Golden Age Wonder Woman Archives edition includes stories from Sensation Comics 1 through 12, only the Wonder Woman stories, and then All-Star Comics 8, which is that first appearance, and then Wonder Woman #1. And her Wonder Woman title was actually a quarterly title, so it didn't come out as frequently, but it was pretty long. And that is the way the archives collect it. But with only 7 archives, it only gets not even halfway to where the Silver Age begins. So there's a huge gap of uncollected Wonder Woman as well, if we were only counting the archives. And not even in black and white have a lot of those issues been collected. So what this first Golden Age omnibus represents is it represents Sensation Comics 1 through 24 and Wonder Woman 1 through 7, which is the first 2 archives editions. Actually, the first 3 archives editions, which I have. So it's kind of like, oh, are you just rebuying the archives? But they're restored a little bit better than the archives are. And they also include Comic Cavalcade 1 through 5, which were some additional Wonder Woman stories and yet another one of DC's anthologies. So to me, to have it in oversized, to have better line work and have those additional stories made sense. Plus, if we're talking about what was collected in those archives, Archive Volume 7 ended with Sensation Comics 56 and Wonder Woman 18. That only takes us halfway through the third omnibus. The third omnibus goes to Sensation Comics 69. That is 13 issues past where the archives stop. And it goes to Wonder Woman 25, 7 issues past where the archives stop. So starting with number 3, we have uncollected material, plus it keeps going with those Comic Cavalcade stories. And then finally, the thing that really put me over the edge was that week that I was making this decision, this 4th edition came out, and this has completely never collected before issues of Golden Age Wonder Woman. Sensation Comics 70 to 89, Comic Cavalcade 23 to 29, and Wonder Woman 26 to 34. So this is interesting because I kind of knew what I was getting into, having read or at least browsed a lot of the stuff in the first 2.5 volumes, and then afterwards not really having any knowledge at all. But also wondering, are DC really going to finish this? Do you know, I do not have a single DC omnibus other than these 4 omnibuses in this house. I have a few DC oversized hardcovers. Like I think I have Death, the Hard Cost of Living. I maybe have a couple other hardcovers. I have a number of DC Absolutes. I have Sandman Absolutes. I have Planetary Absolutes, which were Wildstorm, not the new one that's all in one, the old ones. But I don't have a single DC omnibus. So part of the adventure for me was like, what's a DC omnibus like? I'd never even touched one, I don't think, in all of my years of collecting. So I got this first one, and I immediately was like, ooh, let's go upstairs and read these issues. These have all been opened. I've already stretched the spines and all that. But here's what I discovered. Here's this Wonder Woman book. So it's got this matte paper, which means it's got kind of like a soft toothiness to it. It's not slick, shiny. And it's got that paper wrapped around the outside, and it's got black inside as the end papers. And it has what's known as a deboss, or a stamp on the cover that says Wonder Woman Golden Age Omnibus Volume 1. So it's a different stamp for each one. It's got a little bit of dust on it because it's been by my bed as I've been reading these stories. But here's the thing. Let's open this cover. Let's turn the page. Does that look upside down to you? That's because it is. Because the first DC omnibus I ever bought has the cover board on upside down. Good job, DC. Way to keep me as a buyer and a reader. So that was a laugh to get my first one and have it be that. And the other thing is the spines, and I think maybe we can see this better on the third one. I don't know how well I believe these spines are really put together. Now, I'm not one of these experts of like I don't, as much as I love collected editions, I know much more about paperweight than I know about binding. I've learned about bindings. We all talk about it. So I know the whole thing about square binding versus rounded binding and all that. And I know what the tailband on the top of the book does. And I also know that some of this stuff is just for show and decoration, and some of it has an actual purpose. But if you look in here, even getting it right away, I don't know if you can see this, but the paper on the backing of this is already pulling away. Now the paper is really kind of a decorative element because it's really just there to cover up where all of the signatures are kind of sewn together and also adhered together in a book like this. But it kind of just bugs me that, like, right off the bat, I got one book with an upside down cover. I have books where the paper is pulling away from the spine. So I actually really got turned off to buying more DC omnibuses because I was like, oh, maybe they'll be really cool. Maybe I want more. No, I don't really want any more. It's just a Wonder Woman thing for me. So the build quality kind of, I don't really like these matte covers. I just think they collect a lot of dust. You can just see it. Like, what is this smudge? And then I feel like because it's not glossy, I can't just take like a really light, put a little dot of alcohol or a little dot of something on a tiny sponge and just kind of brush it off the way you can in a glossy cover, because a glossy cover, effectively, it has a seal on it and the seal doesn't absorb liquid as much. But on this, it's really hard. Once they start getting dusty, they're just dusty. So I don't love the build quality. There you go. But do I love the books? And the answer is yes, I do love the books, but we knew this already. I think Wonder Woman in the Golden Age is so progressive, so interesting, so unique in a way that just is not duplicated by any other comic. And that's just because, you know, her creator, whose name I often say incorrectly, so let's see if I can actually say it correctly for a change, William Moulton Marston. I say like Moulton Marston. William Moulton Marston. He specifically wanted to create what today we look at as a feminist symbol, a symbol of liberation. He actually consulted with women in writing it. And Wonder Woman, although she has her moments of being, you know, a subservient to man's world, that's not who she is primarily. It's about this all-woman society that she's in. And of course, some things about it are somewhat backwards to us as modern readers, but it's pretty remarkable that I have these 4 bricks of omnibus on my desk about this woman hero living in her world and trying to bring kind of love and care for fellow man and also some light bondage to the rest of the world. So I still have that library comic of the Wonder Woman Golden Age collections from my youth. It's somewhere in my house. I couldn't lay hands on it just now. And at one point I gave it to my daughter because it was the only Golden Age Wonder Woman I had other than archives, were like really nice. So I was like, oh, you can read this. Not really thinking about it, only really thinking about that first issue and how cool it is. And then she's been reading it before bed for a while. This was like a year or two ago. She was 5. And one day she was like tying up one of her toys. I'm like, oh, are they captured? And she goes, yes, I'm really into bondage right now. As a parent, you're not prepared to hear your 5-year-old talk to you about being really into bondage. And that's when I realized she does need some guidance on Golden Age Wonder Woman. So now that we've talked about the build quality, and now that we've heard me rhapsodize a little bit about the contents, have I read these books? Like, a whole year has gone by. Did I actually read them due to my FOMO? No, I didn't. But here's in my defense. I really thought that while everybody was locked up in our houses here and abroad, that I was going to start a Wonder Woman podcast. I've had this concept forever. I still plan to do it, so I don't want to spoil it all for you. But I actually went so far as to shoot a pilot of it with frequent collaborators of this channel, Fariha and Zach. And it was really cool. It went super long. I was so proud of it. I told everybody I knew here in New Zealand I was doing it. And then it just didn't turn into more. We had so much stuff going on, stressing in the world at large. I didn't really feel like we had nailed the format. I felt like we were not talking about the right amount of issues for the right amount of time. So I put that aside, and ultimately we wound up starting later in the year our X-Men podcast, which is just on Crushing Comics, and there are other episodes mixed in, but it's primarily an X-Men podcast for now. It's not going to be forever. And maybe eventually we'll bring Wonder Woman into that. But I originally thought we were going to read them for that. So I probably got like this far into the first book, and then we didn't move forward with the podcast. But I did just really spend some time appreciating this 4th book because it's stuff that I had never seen before. And I mean, it's cartooning. If you've never seen 40s cartooning, it has a very specific look. But the lines are really beautiful. The reproduction is really nice. The paper, I have to say, is a really nice, heavy, weighty paper. It's glossy, but it's not so shiny that on this black, I mean, look, I have to really play to try to get a reflection on that black. It's not so glossy that everything is shiny. And there's no show through on the white until I turn the page. So this page has tons of white on it, but there is no show through to the other side of the page. Even if I hang it suspended, I can see a little bit of show through, but not that much. So I think they made the right paper decision for this Wonder Woman omnibus, even if I don't love the cover boards and the overall build quality. Which brings us finally to, are there going to be more? Well, DC has already solicited a Wonder Woman Golden Age Omnibus Volume 5. It's been pushed back and pushed back. It might not be coming out until 2022 at this point, but it has been solicited. Now, DC does sometimes not follow up on these things. If it were to come out, it would have Wonder Woman 35 through 47 and Sensation Comics 90 through 104. Now here's the thing, Sensation Comics actually only has Wonder Woman stories for 2 or 3 more issues past that, and then Sensation is done, which means these extra length Wonder Woman issues, they could collect way more of them per book. But clearly Volume 5 is not going to do it. We're at Wonder Woman 47. Wonder Woman runs to 97 before the Silver Age starts officially in Wonder Woman 98. And in fact, just before recording this, DC this week announced that they are going to do a Silver Age Wonder Woman full color, oversized omnibus, starting with that issue 98, which is fantastic. There's only ever one archives of that. It is not widely reprinted in color. I absolutely will buy it because my floppy Wonder Woman collection starts around 1972 or 73. So basically, I want to go all the way up to the Diana Prince era in oversized hardcover, have that as a bookshelf, and then just have my floppies for after that. But that leaves us to the question, which is, will they finish this Golden Age Wonder Woman line? And what would be in that? As I mentioned earlier, that already solicited Wonder Woman Golden Age Omnibus Volume 5 is set to collect Sensation Comics through issue 104. Wonder Woman continues in issues 105 and 106. Maybe they'd get added in, maybe they'd get moved to a volume 6, but in terms of a volume 6, we absolutely do need it because we have to collect from Wonder Woman 48 to 97. Now, Wonder Woman 48 is in 1951, so if that volume 5 gets printed, it will take us into the 1950s, and Wonder Woman 97 takes us all the way through 1958. So could all of those issues, basically 50-ish issues, get put into one book? It would be probably bigger than DC generally tends to go. So a lot of people were thinking, well, okay, maybe it's going to be 2 books, and maybe they'll just squeeze in the very end of that into a Silver Age one and just say it's like prelude to Silver Age and make an excuse. But now we know the Silver Age book has been solicited to start directly at 98, which means either we're going to get a giant volume 6, which seems unlikely, but could happen. We're going to get a volume 6 and a volume 7, which seems very unlikely because what could possibly go in the volume 7 to make it worthwhile? And it's 2 whole books they have to sell past the volume 5, which isn't even sold yet. Or is DC just not going to do them? And that would suck because, you know, Wonder Woman is one of the holy trinity of DC. They've pushed so far in Superman and Batman. We're talking about only needing between 1 and 3 more omnibuses to have completely restored and reprinted Wonder Woman's Golden Age comic books. Please, I hope that we're going to get them. I will have them proudly on my shelf, and maybe one day I really can do that podcast. So that was my big FOMO at the beginning of everything locking down, not knowing what the year would have in store. And it's certainly been a wild year in many respects in my life, not only in terms of things being impacted by the global pandemic, but just having this channel be live with so many videos every week, things happening with my family, things happening with my career. So I hope while we've been really focused on talking about X-Men, and I haven't been doing as personal videos like this, that you've all been well, and that all of you folks who've commented and been around in the past, you know, are still out there and this is going to reach you. So I'd love to know, you know, as all of this lockdown started, did you have a moment of panic where like, other than the essential things you needed to live, was there like one fun thing that you were like, oh, maybe I do want that fun thing for while we're locked in the house? And did you get it? And was it really worth the FOMO? I would love to know. So I have a lot more that I have hauled. There is a stack of boxes basically of equal height to me across the room from me. So I'm going to very regularly start working through those hauls so that we can see all the things that I picked up over this past year and how they fit into my collection. So please tune back in to me here on Haul Around the World, presented by Crushing Comics. And thanks so much for watching.